April 1943. Mid-Atlantic Ocean. In the cramped hold of a Liberty ship, 800 German prisoners of war huddled together, heading toward what their Nazi commanders had told them was a dying nation, a country of weaklings, a land of racial degeneracy that could barely feed its own people. They were Rommel's Afrika Korps proud panzer crews, decorated infantrymen, some of Germany's finest soldiers. They'd fought across the burning sands of North Africa, believing they were the superior race, destined to rule the world. But in 48 hours, everything they believed would be shattered. Not by bullets, not by bombs, but by what they saw when they arrived in America. The arrival, May 5, 1943, New York Harbor. Oberleutnant Huntswecker stood on the deck as the Statue of Liberty emerged from the morning fog. At 19 years old, he'd been told America was a nation on the brink of collapse. But as the ship approached the dock, his first shock hit him like a physical blow. "The New York skyline, mein Gott," he whispered. The Empire State Building pierced the clouds at 1,454 feet, taller than anything in Europe. The Chrysler Building glittered in the morning sun. Dozens of skyscrapers crowded the skyline, each one a monument to wealth and power. In 1943, Germany's tallest building barely reached 400 feet. A fellow prisoner, Sergeant Friedrich Hoffmann, stood frozen at the rail. "They told us America was weak. They told us they couldn't build anything. They told us... His voice trailed off. But the shocks had only just begun. The impossible abundance, as the prisoners were unloaded and processed, they moved through New York's streets under military guard. What they witnessed defied everything they'd been taught. The streets weren't empty. They were packed. Thousands of cars, shiny Buicks, Chevrolets, Fords, filled every avenue. Not military vehicles, private automobiles. In Germany, civilian car ownership had been a luxury reserved for the wealthy and the party elite. Here, even the guards escorting them seemed to own cars. Corporal Werner Burkhardt later wrote in a smuggled letter, "The guards are common soldiers like us, but they speak of their automobiles at home, as if everyone owns one. It cannot be true, yet I see them everywhere." Then came the shops. Through store windows, the prisoners glimpsed something impossible. Shelves stocked full of goods. Meat, fresh bread, canned foods, chocolates, not rationed. Not controlled, just ... there. Available in Germany, every citizen had survived on ration cards since 1939. Butter was a memory. Real coffee didn't exist. Their families were eating sawdust bread mixed with potato flour. One prisoner, Otto Schultz, broke formation to stare at a grocery store window. An MP yanked him back, but not before Otto saw it a display of fresh fruit, oranges, bananas, pineapples. Things he'd only seen in pictures. "They're not at war," he muttered. "They can't be at war." But they were. America was fighting on two fronts, across two oceans, and still somehow her cities overflowed with abundance. Camp Carson, the golden cage, when Huntswecker and his fellow prisoners arrived at Camp Carson. Colorado Springs. They expected harsh treatment. The Geneva Convention was just paper. Everyone knew that. They were wrong about that, too. The camp sprawled across Colorado's high plains, with the Rocky Mountains rising in the distance. Barracks stood in neat rows, not cramped bunkers, but wooden buildings with real beds. Multiple layers of barbed wire enclosed the compound, yes, but the conditions inside defied belief. Their first meal made several prisoners weep. Mess Sergeant Carl Becker stared at his metal tray in silence. Roast beef, real butter, fresh bread, potatoes, vegetables, a piece of apple pie. Coffee, real coffee, not the chicory substitute they'd choked down in Germany. "This is better than what we fed our officers in the Afrika Korps," he said, his voice hollow. One prisoner, Rudolf Meyer, couldn't eat. "My wife, my children, ... They're starving in Hamburg, eating grass soup. And we're the enemies of this country, we eat like kings." The American camp commander explained through a translator. This was standard U.S. Army combat rations. The same food American soldiers ate overseas. By the Geneva Convention, POWs were entitled to equivalent treatment. But in July 1944, when news reached the camps about the luxury their treatment represented, American civilians complained. The U.S. government, embarrassed by the optics of prisoners eating better than some citizens, reduced POW rations to match domestic availability. Even then, the German prisoners ate better than their families in Germany. The Industrial Revolution, the work details changed everything. Assigned to agricultural labor under the Emergency Farm Labor Program, German POS were transported across the American countryside, and they saw what Nazi propaganda could never hide. Farm after farm, mile after mile, stretched across landscapes that made Germany look like a garden plot. American farms didn't just have land, they had machinery. Tractors, combines, mechanical harvesters, equipment that shouldn't exist in a nation supposedly struggling with industrial production. Prisoner Jakob Müller was assigned to work a Nebraska farm. The American farmer, understanding Jakob spoke some English, made casual conversation. "How many acres you farm back home?" the American asked. "My family. Perhaps 40 acres. It was good land. The American laughed not, mockingly, but in genuine surprise. "This place, 640 acres. And my neighbors got twice that." Jakob did the math in his head. This single farmer controlled more land than entire German villages. Then came the factories. POWs, assigned to work at the Ford Willow Run plant, witnessed something that broke their understanding of reality. The factory buildings stretched over 3.5 million square feet under one roof. A mile-long assembly line produced B-2 for Liberator bombers. Former Luftwaffe mechanic, Ernst Klein, watched in stunned silence as a completed four-engine bomber rolled off the line every 63 minutes. Every single hour. 24 hours per day. "We were told one plant couldn't possibly produce more than one aircraft per week," Ernst later wrote in his memoir. "I watched them build 400 in a single month, from one factory. And the Americans told us there were dozens more like it." He did the math. This single American factory was outproducing the entire German aviation industry. "We lost the war years ago," he wrote. "We just didn't know it yet. The people who shouldn't exist, but perhaps the greatest shock wasn't the abundance or the factories. It was the people. Women, at Willow Run, Douglas Aircraft, and Boeing's Seattle plant. Women comprised 65% of the workforce. Not because men were unavailable, though many were fighting, but because American industry had the capacity to train and employ everyone. The prisoners had been taught that women's participation in war production was a sign of desperation, a last resort, a weakness. But these women weren't desperate. They were skilled, efficient, and proud. Rose, Wilman Roth, original Rosie the Riveter, drove 3,000 rivets per shift, with 99.5% accuracy. Better than most men. Inspection teams at Douglas, heavily staffed by women, reduced defect rates from 3.2% to 0.3%. Prisoner Wilhelm Schneider watched a female supervisor correct a male worker's welding technique. "In Germany," he muttered, "women are for home and children. Here, they build bombers that destroy our cities." An American guard overheard him. "That's right. And when you boys go home, these ladies will go back to their lives. But right now, they're helping end this war. Your war." It wasn't just women. The prisoners saw African Americans, Mexican Americans, Native Americans, even disabled workers operating complex machinery, contributing to the war effort. Nazi ideology insisted that racial purity made Germany strong. But America's diversity, the very thing the Nazis mocked, was crushing them. The letters home, censored letters from POW camps, told the story that Nazi propaganda tried to suppress. From Camp Trinidad, Colorado. "Mother, you will not believe what I am about to tell you. The Americans are not weak. They are the strongest nation on earth." Everything we were told was a lie. From Camp Greeley, "The food here is better than what we had at home before the war. I am ashamed to write this while you starve, but it is true." From Fort Robinson, Nebraska, "I worked on a farm yesterday. The farmer's 14-year-old son drives his own automobile to school. A child owns a car. What world is this?" One prisoner, Johannes Hasler, wrote, "Perhaps the most devastating observation. We are not fighting a nation at war. We are fighting a nation that hasn't even fully mobilized. This is America at peace, with one hand tied behind its back. And it's destroying us. The mountain revelation in Colorado's Rocky Mountains. At Camp Hale, near Leadville, 300 German prisoners performed maintenance work for the U.S. 10th Mountain Division. The camp sat at 9,200 feet elevation. The altitude made the Germans gasp for breath during simple tasks. But the American ski troops trained there as if it were nothing, preparing for alpine warfare. Prisoner Andreas Wagner, a veteran of mountain warfare in Norway, watched in disbelief as American soldiers skied down slopes carrying full combat loads. "These Americans are supposed to be soft," he told a fellow prisoner. "They live in luxury. They know nothing of hardship. Yet they train harder than our mountain troops ever did." One evening, the German prisoners were marched past the base theater. Through the open doors, they glimpsed American soldiers watching a movie in color. Entertainment, recreation during wartime. "We fought in North Africa with half rations and no mail for 6 months," Andreas said. "These soldiers watch films and eat ice cream, and they're winning. The newspaper that changed minds. The intellectual diversion program, America's re-education effort, for posts seemed like propaganda at first. Books that had been banned in Nazi Germany. Publications representative of the American spirit. The prisoners expected lies. But they also received American newspapers, real ones. The New York Times, the Denver Post, Life magazine, Time, and the numbers were undeniable. In 1944, American factories produced 96,270 aircraft, not over 4 years. In 1 year, Germany's entire wartime production, 94,677 aircraft total, across 6 years of war. Prisoner Martin Weber, a former accountant, did the calculations over and over, checking his math. "It's not possible. No single nation can produce this much. The numbers must be false." But they weren't false. And every month, more bombers appeared in German skies. More fighters, more everything. The mathematical reality of defeat was undeniable. The escape that proved everything in September 1943. Lieutenant Karl Gallowitz and Horst Herb escaped from Camp Trinidad. They'd modified their Afrika Korps uniforms to look like American Boy Scout outfits, disguise that seemed absurd until you understood their thinking. American children dressed better than German soldiers. They were captured within hours, but the escape attempt revealed something fascinating. During interrogation, both men admitted something that shocked American intelligence. They hadn't planned to flee to German-held territory. They'd planned to disappear into American society. "Where would we go?" Karl said. "Back to Germany. To what? My city is rubble. My family eats rats. Here, even as a prisoner, I have 3 meals a day and a bed. Here, even your poor people have electricity and running water." Another prisoner, Heinrich Hader, orchestrated a more elaborate escape. He made contact with Japanese-American farm girls who sympathized with the Axis cause. They provided him civilian clothes, road maps, and photographs. Hader was caught within days. But during his interrogation, he made a statement that the American officers found more disturbing than the escape itself. "I saw beautiful America," he said simply. "Even your enemies fell in love with it." The abundance they couldn't explain. POS assigned to farms experienced what many called the most shocking revelation of all. American farmers were wealthy. Not rich industrialists or party officials. Common farmers, men who worked the land, just like German peasants. But these American farmers owned their land. They had electricity, running water, indoor plumbing, telephones, automobiles, often 2 automobiles. Their children attended schools with gymnasiums and libraries. Prisoner Gustav Wilhelm worked a Nebraska farm. The farmer's wife invited the work detail inside for lunch against regulations. But American civilians often ignored such rules when it came to basic humanity. Gustav stood frozen in the kitchen. An electric refrigerator hummed in the corner, filled with fresh food, an electric stove, a radio playing music. Through the window, he saw a red barn that looked newer and better maintained than many German municipal buildings. "This is a poor farmer," Gustav asked the translator. He's doing all right, the translator said with a shrug. Pretty average, I'd say average. Gustav returned to camp that night and didn't speak for hours. Finally, he told his bunkmates, "We didn't lose the war. We lost before it started. We just didn't know it." The moment they understood Christmas 1943. At camps across America, something unprecedented happened. Local American families, knowing that German prisoners were far from home during the holidays, sent gifts. Not as a military strategy, not as propaganda, as simple human kindness. At Camp Carson, prisoners received care packages from Denver families. Cookies, warm socks, chocolate. Letters saying Merry Christmas in broken German. At a South Carolina farm, a family that employed German POW labor invited them to Christmas dinner. The prisoner, Cecil Camlin, later remembered, "They were the enemy. We were the enemy. But on that day, they treated us like their sons, who were fighting overseas. We sang carols together, they in English, we in German. And I understood something my commanders never told me. Americans don't hate people. They hate tyranny." Prisoner after prisoner reached the same conclusion during that first American Christmas. The nation they'd been taught to despise showed them more humanity in captivity than their own. Government had shown them in service. The letters that weren't censored by 1944. American censors began allowing certain letters from German POWs to pass through. Uncensored understanding that the truth these men told their families would do more damage to Nazi morale than any propaganda. From Werner Schmidt to his brother in the Wehrmacht. Surrender if you can. Become a prisoner. I know this sounds like cowardice, but brother, you must trust me. The Americans are not what we were told. Surrender, live. Come see what I have seen, from Klaus Becker to his wife. When I return to Germany, I don't know what we will find. But I know this. We must rebuild our nation to be more like this one. Not their politics, not their system, but their spirit, their freedom, their belief that anyone can prosper through honest work. This is what we lost when we followed the Führer into darkness. From Friedrich Weber to his son, you are young. You don't remember Germany before the Nazis, but I do. And I tell you now, America is what Germany could have been, should have been, might still become, if we learn from our mistakes. The harvest of understanding by 1945. As the war in Europe drew to a close, more than 400,000 German prisoners worked on American farms, in factories, even in some cases dining alongside the families that employed them. The harvest statistics told their own story. In 1943, German POWs in Colorado harvested an average of 1.5 tons of sugar beets per man, per day. Respectable, but not exceptional. By 1945, that figure had risen to 4 tons per man per day. Why? Because the prisoners understood something fundamental. They weren't just working for their captors. They were working in a system that rewarded efficiency, valued human labor, and offered dignity to workers. American farm supervisors noted something remarkable in their reports. German POWs worked harder and better than many had worked in their entire lives. Not because they were forced to. Not because they feared punishment, but because for the first time they felt like their work mattered. The return to reality, May 1945, Germany surrendered. For the German POWs in America, celebration was impossible. They'd heard reports, their cities were destroyed. Their families displaced, millions dead. The Third Reich had collapsed into ash and ruin. But something else had happened during their captivity. Something the Nazis never anticipated. These prisoners had seen the truth. In late 1945 and throughout 1946, German POS were repatriated. They returned to a Germany that was unrecognizable not because of the bomb damage, though that was extensive, but because they themselves had changed. Hans Wecker, the young officer who'd first glimpsed the New York skyline, returned to a Hamburg that was 50% rubble. His family home was gone, but he'd saved every penny of his POW wages, 80 cents per day, adding up to nearly $400 over 2 years. In destroyed Germany, that American money could buy almost anything. More importantly, he'd saved something else: knowledge. "I learned how democracy works," he wrote in his post-war memoir. "Not from books or lectures, but from watching it. American farmers who owned their land, workers who negotiated their wages, women who held real jobs, people of every race working side by side. And somehow, it didn't collapse into chaos. It thrived. The farmer's son in 1950, something extraordinary happened. A young German man named Hans Müller arrived in Brush, Colorado. He was 18 years old, spoke broken English, and carried a single suitcase. He was the son of Nomad Müller, one of the German posts who'd worked on Colorado farms during the war. Reverend Leo Patrick, who administered to the prisoners, had kept his promise. He'd sponsored Hans to come to America, to attend Brush High School, to have a chance at the life his father had glimpsed during the war. Hans wasn't alone. Dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of former German POWs returned to America after the war. Not as prisoners, but as immigrants. They brought their families, they bought farms, they started businesses, they became citizens. They'd seen both worlds, and they chose America. The industrial arithmetic of defeat after the war, the numbers became public, and they were staggering. The United States produced 295,959 military aircraft during World War II. Germany produced 94,677. America, 88,410 tanks and self-propelled guns. Germany, 67,429. America, 257,390 artillery pieces. Germany, 159,147. America, 2,382,311 trucks. Germany, 345,914. But the numbers only told part of the story. America accomplished this, while also supplying the British with thousands of aircraft and tanks, feeding the Soviet Union through Lend-Lease, building the atomic bomb, maintaining a navy larger than all other navies combined, keeping civilian living standards higher than pre-war levels. Germany had mobilized every resource, enslaved millions, stripped occupied territories bare, and still couldn't match America's output. Former prisoner Ernst Klein summed it up in his memoir. "We thought we were the master race. We thought our industrial prowess was unmatched. We thought dictatorship made us strong. We were wrong about everything." The letters that continued long after the war ended. Letters flowed between former German POWs and the American families who'd known them. The Lutyens family in Nebraska maintained correspondence with their former farm workers for decades. They sent food packages to Germany during the desperate post-war years. Eventually, they visited their former enemies in Germany, now friends. Similar stories played out across America. The prisoners who'd worked at farms, been invited to homes, shared meals and conversations with American families they never forgot. And neither did the Americans. One American farmer wrote to his former POW worker, "You boys taught us something too. That men are men, no matter where they're born. That the enemy isn't the soldier across the field, but the ideology that puts him there. We're grateful you survived. We're grateful you saw what America really is. And we hope Germany can become that someday too." The legacy they never expected. The German POW experience in America had consequences no one anticipated. Many of these former prisoners became leaders in post-war West Germany. They brought with them an understanding of democracy that was lived, not theoretical. They'd seen it work. They'd benefited from it, even as prisoners. When West Germany rebuilt, it didn't just copy American systems, but the influence was undeniable. Workers' councils, strong labor protections, a social market economy that balanced capitalism with social welfare, a deep skepticism of totalitarian authority. The Marshall Plan provided the resources. But the former POWs provided something more valuable: testimony. They could tell their fellow Germans, "I've seen it. Democracy works. Capitalism can be fair. Diversity is strength, not weakness. Trust me. I was there. The final accounting in the end." Hermann Göring was right to laugh at Roosevelt's claim that America would produce 50,000 aircraft per year. Because America didn't produce 50,000 aircraft per year. At peak production in 1944, America produced 96,270 military aircraft, nearly double what the Reichsmarschall thought impossible. And those aircraft built by women who were supposed to be weak, by minorities who were supposed to be inferior, by a democracy that was supposed to be inefficient, those aircraft darkened German skies, destroyed German factories, and ended the Third Reich. The German POWs, who arrived in America expecting to find a dying nation, discovered something that shook them to their core. They'd been lied to about everything. America wasn't weak. It was the strongest nation on earth. Americans weren't degenerate. They were the most industrious people these prisoners had ever encountered. Democracy wasn't chaos. It was the most efficient system of production and organization ever devised, and perhaps most devastating to everything they'd believed. The master race wasn't superior to anyone. In fact, the diverse, messy, chaotic American melting pot was crushing them, precisely because of its diversity, not in spite of it. Epilogue: the prisoner who understood Hans Wecker. The young officer who'd first seen the New York skyline in 1943 eventually returned to America permanently. He became a doctor, settling in Georgetown, Maine. He raised his family there. He became a citizen. In a 1995 interview, at age 71, he was asked what shocked him most about his POW experience. The abundance, he said, without hesitation, but not material abundance. I'd seen the food, the cars, the factories. What really shocked me was abundance of spirit. Americans genuinely believed anyone could succeed. They believed in second chances. They believed that even prisoners' anomalies deserved dignity. That was the abundance that defeated us, not your bombs. Your belief in human potential. He paused, emotional despite the decades that had passed. We were told America was our enemy. We learned that tyranny was our enemy. America was our salvation. Closing in May 1940, when FDR announced America would produce 50,000 aircraft annually, Hermann Göring laughed. By 1945, Göring was on trial at Nuremberg, forced to confront the evidence of American production. The charts. The numbers. The overwhelming, undeniable mathematical proof that everything he'd believed was a lie. But the real proof wasn't in the numbers. It was in the faces of the German POWs who'd seen America with their own eyes, who'd eaten American food, worked American farms, witnessed American industry, and experienced American freedom, who returned to Germany and told the truth, who said, "We lost this war before it started, not because they were stronger, but because their system, their crazy, messy, democratic system unleashed human potential we'd spent years suppressing. The assembly lines at Willow Run didn't just build bombers. They built proof that free people, working together, could accomplish the impossible. And 400,000 German prisoners witnessed it firsthand. That was the real shock. Not the skyscrapers, or the abundance, or the industrial might, but the realization that they'd fought for the wrong side. And that America, chaotic, diverse, democratic America, was everything Germany could have been. If only they'd believed in freedom instead of tyranny. If only they'd trusted democracy instead of dictatorship. If only they'd learned what those prisoners learned, that the strength of a nation isn't measured in racial purity or military discipline. It's measured in the potential of its free people. And America's people, all of them, in their beautiful, messy diversity, were unstoppable. End when German prisoners saw America, the shock that changed everything in 1943. German POWs arrived in America, expecting to find a weak, dying nation. What they discovered instead shattered everything Nazi propaganda had taught them. This is the incredible true story of 400,000 German prisoners of war who witnessed American industrial might, democratic freedom, and unimaginable abundance firsthand. From the New York City skyline to Colorado farms, from bomber factories to Christmas dinners with American families, these captured soldiers experienced a reality that their leaders never wanted them to see. Based on first-hand accounts, declassified documents, and historical records, this documentary reveals how German POWs reacted to American skyscrapers, abundance, industrial production, and most shocking of all, the treatment they received as prisoners. Real testimonies from German POS, documented reactions to American cities, farms, and factories. The incredible story of Willow Run and American aircraft production. How American abundance shocked soldiers who'd been told the US was weak. The POWs who fell in love with America and returned after the war. The mathematical reality that proved Germany had already lost. This isn't just a World War II story. It's a testament to what free people can accomplish, what happens when ideology meets reality.